Okay, in this teaching module, I'm going to talk about efficiency versus equality. What Gregory Mankiw calls, Gregory Mankiw of Harvard University, who has the #1 selling textbook, principles textbook. His principle #1 is that people face trade-offs between the efficiency and equality. So we know economic principle #1 is that the market, and from Sowell's rule, that the market is the most efficient way to allocate resources. By definition, with a profit motive, the market is the most efficient way to allocate resources. And we've looked at economic growth with a historical perspective. So now we'll look at the inequality caused by the market. So up until capitalism, you had no inequality except the ruling class, the church and the crown. They had all the wealth, and by suppressing everybody else's standard of living, by suppressing free trade. Then you had free trade, the rule of law, the gold standard, and all the economic growth per person that capitalism, free market, early capitalism allowed. But you also get, by definition, and this is a mathematical tautology, because this is what you're trying to measure, so it's a tautology. You'll see that the market creates increasing inequality. You'll see that the market, historically, by definition, because it's a mathematical tautology, that's what you're trying to measure. We could call that between the bottom 20% and the top 20%. So by definition, the market is creating inequality because that's what we're measuring. We're looking at that inequality. And it should be known that the top 20% and the bottom 20% are not always the same. And there's been lots of studies on that. Not all of them agree. It depends where you're coming from. It depends what your pre-analytical vision is. What you want to measure is the result that you usually get. So you should always look at 3 different sources from different points of view when studying these things. So by definition, the market creates inequality between the top 20% and the bottom 20%. However, what the free market does, again, the market's the most efficient way to allocate resources, it lowers creates a reduction in absolute poverty. So the market creates inequality on the one hand, but on the other hand, it reduces absolute inequality, absolute poverty, it reduces absolute poverty. Everybody is getting wealthier. Everybody's living longer, healthier lives due to the market under early capitalism. And then again, everything changed in 2008. Now, for the first time in history, the debt, except for World War II, the debt is growing quicker than national income. And that started as a result of the 2008 bailouts, and then is just made worse under the current administration and the COVID reactions. So by definition, people face a trade-off. They face a trade-off between market efficiency and the inequality caused by the market. So we as individuals then, through the political system or revolution or whatever, then determine what we want to see. Are we concerned about a reduction in absolute poverty, or are we concerned about inequality? Now, Hayekians look over the long term and look at the historical perspective, how everybody is living longer, healthier lives. But politicians like to create fear. Populists, demagogues like to create fear and focus on the inequality created by the market. So what I wanted to do is unpack. So what we're concerned is about reduction in absolute poverty versus the relative inequality caused by the market. So again, you have Adam Smith arguing for classical liberal principles, free trade, the gold standard, and rule of law. And then Karl Marx and Frederick Engels are writing in 1848. And in 1848, they come out with the Communist Manifesto. And for Marx and Engels, they look at the world as a class struggle, where the top 20% is the capitalist class, and the bottom 20% are the working class. So Marx and Engels, they have a labor theory of value, and they believe that only the working class creates value, and the capitalist class are exploiting the working class. So what Marx really wanted, if you're a European Marxist, not a United States Marxist, he wanted the unfettered market to create such wealth that you could basically get rid of property rights and have social communism, where everything's owned in common. So what Marx envisioned happening is there would be enough wealth created that the working class would overthrow the capitalist class and create a dictatorship of the proletariat, where the state controlled everything, and that's called socialism. And then the dictator of the proletariat would have a rise in consciousness, and the state would wither away, and you'd have communism where everything's owned in common. And of course, every Marxist, quote unquote, Marxist-based revolution that ever was, the state never went away. The state just grew its power and became more and more authoritarian. So I had a student once ask me, so if Marx believes in the class struggle, was Marx a capitalist or a working class, right? So he was placing himself outside of the system, and that's why Marxists created this term intelligentsia to justify those criticizing the two-class system. But it should be noted that John Stuart Mill, also in the same year, 1848, in his Principles of Political Economy, he said the way to break the class struggle is to have profit sharing between incentive compatibility. The capitalists, or the owners of the means of production, would share the profits with those they employ. So the class struggle, by definition, the same year that it was popularized, there was a valid critique that you can break the class struggle by having incentive compatibility through profit sharing. So anyway, that's Karl Marx's view on the inequality caused by the market, that it would eventually lead to a revolution, socialism through capitalism. But we've seen in history that all revolutions lead to dictatorships or authoritarian regimes. So another writer we'll look at next is Thorstein Veblen. So Thorstein Veblen was an American economic sociologist. His book was The Theory of the Leisure Class. And of course, in the United States, around the time Veblen's writing, 1898, you have these industrialists like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies who've created, they're called industrialists, or we would call them entrepreneurs today, created vast wealth. And so for Veblen, he calls them the leisure class. So the leisure class are the wealthy, or the top 20% or 5%, or however you're measuring it, by whom and why and with what data and for what reason. And then, so then everyone else. So for Veblen, the bottom 20%, or everyone else who's not the leisure class, they don't want to overthrow the leisure class. They want to be seen as living like the leisure class. And he called that, Veblen called that conspicuous consumption. And Veblen also thought it was immiserating or poverty creating because you're spending your income and your wealth on conspicuous consumption. In other words, to appear to be living like the wealthy. So that was Veblen's take on the inequality caused by the market under his particular period of history. Then now we'll get on to Frederick Hayek. So again, we'll go here. We'll go top 10% and bottom 90%. Again, however you're measuring it and why. So for Hayek and Hayekians, I'm a Hayekian, a classical liberal. I believe in the gold standard free trade and a predictable, unchangeable rule of law, because I believe that the market reduces absolute poverty. And the reason that you have so many people in subsistence poverty in Africa is because the West doesn't allow free trade in agriculture goods. So for Hayekians, the view on the inequality caused by the market, as long as you have social mobility, as long as your entrepreneurial talent or luck or creative ability or intelligence or hard work allows you to move between these rich and poor, I call the rich those with more disposable income and the poor with less disposable income. So you can call it rich and poor. Why don't we do that? Rich and poor. Those with more disposable income and those with less disposable income. As long as you have social mobility, which allows the poor to become rich and the rich become poor, and under some entrepreneurial economics or entrepreneurial thinking, if you're not poor, you're not trying hard enough. You're not taking enough risk, right? So as long as you have social mobility between the classes of rich and poor, the process is fair. As long as the process is fair, then the outcome is fair, right? But if the fix is in and you don't have social mobility, then the process is unfair and the outcome is unfair. So on my website, I've got an article from the New York Times called "The Truth Behind the 1%, or the Real Reason Behind the 1%, or something like that. So one of the memes in the debate over inequality is the 1% versus everybody else. One of the memes into the debate over inequality is the 1% versus everybody else. And the New York Times article describes why you have a 1% perpetuating itself. And the reason for that is because certain sectors of the economy have captured the economy. and have become vested interests. They have gamed government regulation and government power to benefit themselves and harm everyone else, preventing social inequality, preventing social mobility, and creating inequality. So the reason that you have, according to the New York Times article and this recent book, The Captured Economy by Lindsay and Tellis, is that certain sectors have captured the economy, preventing competition and creating social immobility and perpetuating a wealthy 1%. So we don't have a Hayekian free market economy today. What we have is a captured economy, where certain sectors, especially due to occupational licensing and the ability to move in and out of certain sectors, perpetuates a 1% due to rent seeking. They've captured the economy and they've become vested interests. And the special sectors who are in the 1%, due to the lack of social mobility, due to the economy being captured by vested interests, especially are the legal sector, the medical sector, and the financial sector. The central bank has a monopoly on currency issuance. Certain Wall Street firms have a monopoly on issuing government debt. And the state itself has captured the economy. And you saw that with the COVID crisis and all the state employees being declared essential while many others weren't being declared essential. So that's an overview of the debate over the efficiency versus equality. The market, by definition, creates inequality, but by definition, it reduces absolute poverty. And so we face a trade-off as society and individuals as to what we believe is correct and why. And as a Hayekian, I would like to remove the barriers to entry that perpetuates the 1%, and that's economic competition. Thank you. That completes our teaching module on efficiency versus equality. Only you know what's best in your eyes for society. Thank you.